And here you see what's causing this. The main thing is, the natural subsidence that's linked to the activities in the industrial zone of Marghera. When they reclaimed all that land and they thought that it was an interesting way to relaunch the economy of Venice and the vitality of the city by having this big petrochemical processing area, they used large quantities of groundwater from underneath Marghera to as cooling waters, etc., for the industrial processes, and that caused, more than 20 centimeters of subsidence for the whole of Venice. And for a city that's built at water level, that's pretty dramatic. Once they realized that in 1970, they stopped the pumping of groundwater from underneath Marghera, and there was just a 2 centimeter rebound because there'd been a lot of compaction in the during the subsidence process that meant that they couldn't completely regain that height relative to water level even once the groundwater reserves had recharged. Then there's continuous ongoing natural subsidence just due to geological processes and the fact that the whole region is formed on relatively fresh sediments. And then there's Eustace, which is sea level rise. That's an ongoing process. Monday and Tuesday of this coming week, there's a big important meeting being hosted by UNESCO, where some of the leading researchers on sea level rise will be getting together for the first time to really apply their minds to some kind of understanding of what the outlook is for Venice. So that'll be interesting. I'm sorry it didn't happen last week, in which case I could tell you it. But look at the relative sea level rise over the last 3 centuries, and you see that it's been very dramatic. And what I thought you'd be interested in is the paintings of Canaletto have been very important in reconstructing our understanding of water level trends in Venice. And he was such an accurate and precise painter that he even included that the green algal line that you see on the facade of buildings near water level. And what that represents is the average high water mark. And you when you go around Venice now, you see that that's very high. It's often above the impermeable stone base that most buildings have, made out of Istrian stone. And so by looking at the buildings painted by Canaletto and the same buildings today, they observe the algal shift and they can reconstruct what water level was in Venice back in the 18th century. Another good person for this kind of accuracy is the painter Bellotto. Just the extreme kind of flooding that we have today or during the weekend, there's going to be more. This kind of thing will be dealt with once they've finished building the mobile barriers, which is forecast for, I think, 2014. But this isn't going to be helped by that. And here you see a kind of selection of examples of kind of physical degradation of Venice, and caused by this creeping water level that's eating away at the building fabric. And in fact, there's some recent research which has found corrosion even of the metal tie beams as high up as on the first floor level of houses, because what happens is as the water gets above the impermeable base of the palaces, it gets into the brickwork and then goes capillary rise up through the walls, and then as the walls dry out, the water evaporates, but the salt crystals are left there, and that corrodes the building materials, the bricks, which just flake away. And in fact, they even say there's problems in some buildings with the floor beam, with the woodwork, because where the floor rests on the walls, to make the beams underneath the floor at the first floor level of houses, they've found some salt penetration even there. So Venice can't continue even with the water level that we have today without enormous and continuous investments in urban maintenance, ordinary maintenance of buildings, of streets, of bridges. This is the bottom left shows at the fish market where there's the gondola that goes back and forth across the Grand Canal, and every few years I see them rebuilding those wooden steps. Well, it's not such a big deal to rebuild the wooden steps, but when it happens, the whole buildings are crumbling. That requires significant resources to maintain. And this is an artistic photograph of the same thing, and this kind of thing. This is the Camerlenghi at the near the base of the Rialto Bridge, and this kind of thing is something that Venice is going to have to coexist with and still needs to find solutions for. So one thing that has been happening since the mid-1990s is the program of raising ground level in Venice wherever possible. And this is the Insula, which is the company more or less owned by the town council that has been doing they're called local defences. And where possible, they've raised the level of the walkways to at least 100 centimetres relative to the tide gauge zero, if not 110 or 120 centimetres. So not all the city, much less of the city is flooded on a day like today as it would have been 10 years ago. And at the same time, you can see they've used it as an opportunity to redo all the infrastructure for the utilities of Venice, water, gas, etc. So it's been useful. However, there's not so much debate about it because the program for raising ground level has been halted due to lack of government funding for the projects. But when they were at their most intense activities, in the early 2000s, there was a big debate between the engineers of Insula that were guiding this work and some professors at the Architecture University, because it's an aesthetic kind of architectural issue, is just how high can they raise, is there a limit to how high they raise the ground levels, assuming, they stop before there's a risk that people will start bumping their heads walking through doorways, which you can see in the top right, that area is getting close to that. But, to raise ground levels, you'll see when you walk through a square, you see the wells in the middle of the square no longer have the steps going round the side, or in front of doorways you don't see all the steps leading up to the doorway, or even columns have lost their bases, and that changes very much the architectonic significance of these buildings. And is that all right to do in Venice or isn't it? So think about it. And this is this is again from Insula that have a very advanced geographical information system, and it shows ground levels relative to the tide gauge zero throughout the city. You can find this on the web, and you see just how very variable it is, because whereas there's the generalized anthropogenic subsidence caused by the activities in Marghera and the ongoing geological subsidence, there's also localized compaction and subsidence that happens differently according to the weight of the buildings, exactly what was underneath, etc. And here's I don't know why I put that picture of the 1966 flood, but I assume you've all seen enough about that. And this is just to show you how, when that happened in 1966, there was also this very big flooding in the mainland from the rivers. So the problem of flooding and water management isn't just Venice, it's in fact this whole area. And this map on the far right shows the green areas are at least 2 meters above sea level, and the brown, yellow and olive green areas are like at sea level or up to 2 meters below sea level. So it's a generalized issue for the whole area is the whole management of the relationship with water and the hydrographic network on the mainland, as well as in the lagoon and the connections between the lagoon and the sea. Finally, this shows the latest sea level projections following that came out of the Copenhagen diagnosis, which to see that in fact, quite significant changes are on their way. But it's better that I wait until after the meeting next week to be able to give more accurate projections for Venice. But it's very, very, very significant, which means it's not like Venice needs to go. They can decide how they want to preserve Venice. They could dike it off at the inlets. They could just build some high walls just around the historic center. There's endless opportunities. It's just a question of creating a basis for some kind of long-term integrated thinking.
Thank you.